Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. And I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. Hi, Ruthie.
Hi, Mark. Before we start, I would just like to make an appeal to our viewers, anybody who likes this podcast, please subscribe and press the notifications button. And that way our material can go farther and wider. Thank you. All right, Mark, I'm going to start by, I guess everybody can figure out what the topic is today. And that is the ceasefire in Lebanon. I'd like to just also to tell our viewers that you and I both admire or have faith in Prime Minister Netanyahu as he has been handling the war in Gaza and in Lebanon and having to walk through proverbial and literal minefields doing so. However, I find that this deal is atrocious. And so I would like to start with your explaining why you think it's actually not a bad thing.
So last night, the Israeli Security Cabinet officially adopted the ceasefire proposal. I think it was public, a vote of 10-1, an overwhelming majority. From a political point of view, the only person who voted against the ceasefire was Minister Ben-Gvir. Even Smotrich, who's usually on the right side of the government. If you listen to international media, he's like always with Ben-Gvir. He voted for the ceasefire deal, and I would urge people who are, they're a bit uneasy about the ceasefire, then if it's so bad for Israel, why did someone like Smotrich vote for it? Yes, he's not known to be a member of peace now. I said that with a smile for the people who are just listening and not watching the video. Following that, Netanyahu spoke, Biden spoke, and as of waking up this morning, the border with Lebanon is quiet. Now, we've been doing this podcast for half a year now, maybe a bit more, since Passover. And for the first time, there's not fire across the Israeli-Lebanese frontier. Now, the criticism could be of this deal, and it's always a criticism, that you're buying short-term quiet, which the army wants. They need to rest and recuperate, and the soldiers, we're getting the news, soldiers are dying every day. No, that's going to stop. And theoretically, people who've got properties who want to move back to the north will feel safer to move back to the north. But the criticism is we're buying short-term quiet for long-term problems. And the other criticism is, we're on this roll where we were destroying Hezbollah. We killed Nasrallah, the supreme leader of Hezbollah. We took out all their entire leadership. We've been destroying their military infrastructure in the south. We've been hitting their targets across Lebanon. We're on a winning streak. Why stop? That's the criticism. And I would, before we go into the nuts and bolts, I would argue on a philosophical point of view. I think it was President Eisenhower, and if I'm wrong, one of our viewers will send us an email like they've done in the past when I made a mistake, but I think it was President Eisenhower who said, never let the possible stand in the way of the perfect. If you tell me, Ruthie, that this deal is not perfect, that it's a Swiss cheese, it's full of holes, right? So I might not agree with the Swiss cheese, but I'll agree it's not perfect. But never let the possible stand in the way of what is doable and what is achievable. And I would argue, after a string of military successes in dealing with Hezbollah, and we had success after success, from the beeper incident through to, more recently blowing up underground bunkers and hitting the Hezbollah banks across Lebanon and so forth. After a string of successes, you've always got to worry about what I call automatic pilot, that your success leads to success, and ultimately then you fail. And you have the law of diminishing returns, right? And we took out Nasrallah. We took out the entire top leadership. We're all across South Lebanon. We're blowing up the bunkers. To continue, would we still be getting the same level of positive return as we were doing until now? And so I think Netanyahu made the right decision. I think the Security Cabinet made the right decision. I think it's a good deal for Israel precisely because, unlike the original 1701 UN resolution from a decade and a half ago, this leaves Israel this deal leaves Israel in the driver's seat. We, according to this understandings reached, Israel has the prerogative that if we see Hezbollah breaking the agreement, either by launching a missile or by trying to bring in arms illicitly or trying to send their soldiers into the area south of Netanya where they can't do it, in all such circumstances, Israel has the right to act militarily. In other words, you've got an agreement and we have the right to enforce it. And I think that's a major achievement for Israel.
Okay, so I'll tell you why I don't think so. And I don't think so for two main reasons. One is that we are operating in the Middle East already this morning. Hezbollah, Iran, they're celebrating. It's a great victory. Now, we know they do that all the time. But in the Middle East, rhetoric is important and perception is extremely important for the people. That's one thing. The second reason is that you said we'll have freedom to operate when the enemy violates the agreement, which, by the way, wasn't made with the enemy. It was really made with Lebanon and with Washington.
It gives us permission to do so when they violate.
When they violate. So since I don't trust the word violate here, I have too much experience with our own country, with the Jewish people and Israelis and subsequent Israeli governments, even those I support. And that is what will constitute a violation. Now, obviously, if missiles fly from Lebanon, that would be a clear violation. But Hezbollah is not that stupid. And there are many more violations of the kind that we have ignored for 18 years in Lebanon, and we ignored for as many years in Gaza, even though we did fight in Gaza a few times. The fact is, we did not put our foot down when there were many, many, many violations. That's partly because of our over-interventionist Supreme Court and Attorney General, et cetera, and our constant worry that we have to prove to the international community that we are not violating anything, which is, of course, nonsense. Here, now, when Netanyahu, I'd like to compare two things also. Netanyahu made a very great speech last night. I mean, that's not surprising. He does that. And a little while later, Biden also made a speech. Now, whether you could consider Biden's speech well delivered or not, the fact is it was an appalling, everything he said in it was appalling. Now, let's start with Netanyahu. The main takeaway from Netanyahu's speech was that he couldn't be very specific. He can't give all the details, but he said three main points. One is, we right now have to focus our energy on Iran. Now, we know what that means. First of all, Iran is the head of the snake in the region. Iran is, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, as is Hamas in Gaza, and we still don't have the hostages back from Gaza. Okay, so he said, we have to focus on Iran. Now, that was a hint, in my opinion, to the whole region and to the Israeli public that he's cooking something, that we can't know what it is, because he said, I won't expand on that. Something's up his sleeve, and if we've learned one thing from this war, it's that every time we got disillusioned, he pulled a different incredible rabbit out of his hat. So let's say give him the benefit of the doubt on Iran. Because if we really cause either regime change or we actually take out the nuclear facilities, then there is no Hezbollah. Okay, I mean, in other words, let's get the real enemy and then Hezbollah is irrelevant. Okay, fine. The second thing he said is we need to let our soldiers and reservists rest for the next 60 days because this deal says it's a pause for 60 days until, during which time the IDF retreats. I call it retreat, not withdraw.
Redeploy.
Yeah, right. Okay. You say so. The Lebanese army comes down to the border, and the bigger is, guess who else is monitoring this? UNIFIL, the very organization that not only has looked the other way since for the last 18 years, but also has been colluding with Hezbollah, the way UNRWA has been colluding with Hamas. So to have UNIFIL even mentioned or back in the picture is a big joke. And then there are the French who, as soon as the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, France said, we'll abide by that. Now, because France wants to be part of this deal, and Netanyahu said, oh, really? You want to be part of the monitoring of Lebanon after you're going to arrest me if I land in your country? Macron he issued some kind, I wouldn't call it an apology. It was kind of a
clarification.
Yeah, sort of clarification. It was baloney is what it was, but never mind. Okay, so that's another reason why I say, oh yeah, right. The other is that we don't have this deal does not allow for a buffer zone, no man's land, so to speak, that we actually have done in Gaza, which is why a lot of people in southern Israel have moved back to their homes, and the people in northern Israel cannot possibly move back to their homes until I don't know what time. But believe me, I sure wouldn't go back there. And it's not because you see this business of, well, they stopped firing rockets. It's not just rockets. There are terrorists planning an October 7th-like invasion. There are tunnels. There are many reasons to worry that they're not safe. Now, you have to understand, people who live along the border, if you take Metula as an example in northern Israel, it's 10 yards. I mean, that's 10 meters, is 10 yards away from the Lebanon border, where today, a few hours after the ceasefire went into effect, a jeep with Hezbollah operatives came towards the border. Now, what happened? IDF soldiers shot a warning shot in the air. I think that that's a perfect example of how we say, did we shoot in the air? That was a violation. First of all, even civilians in the villages in southern Lebanon were told not for 2 weeks. You cannot come back to your villages for 2 weeks while we get arranged. And civilians were seen making their way south. They did not abide by this. Now, we're not going to go shooting up civilians. Excuse me, that Jeep, why did we fire a warning shot? I would say right between the eyes to any terrorist that comes anywhere near that fence.
I want to respond to some of the things you've said. First of all, on the issue of UNIFIL, the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, and the Lebanese army, do I have faith in their ability to protect Israel? And I'm on the same page as you, right? Only Israel should protect Israel, right? I don't have any illusions about these organizations. The criticism of UN forces in Lebanon is clear. I mean, Hezbollah was building all this huge military structure in Lebanon with the UN there, and the UN, as far as anyone can see, did very little, if anything at all, to stop them doing so, even though there was a UN resolution saying that they shouldn't be there, Hezbollah, right? So, but I think two things need to be said here. First of all, maybe the references in the agreement to UNIFIL and to the Lebanese army, that's to sort of legitimacy, that's to give the agreement, so people in the UN and the European Union and others can say, oh, yeah, this is very important. But ultimately, once again, I don't think the government of Israel, I don't think Netanyahu would have agreed to the deal if they really, in a practical way, our security was somehow dependent upon UNIFIL or the Lebanese army. No. It's clear. The whole core of the agreement is Israel's right to act, to protect its interests, against violations of the agreement. Then you raise a very serious point, right? And I don't negate the point that you say, well, Hezbollah is Hezbollah, and they'll start off doing little things, and people say, well, you're going to start a major war over a little thing, and they'll do something else. It's like the child, you say to the child, I remember learning this in international relations many years ago, as a student. So, you tell the child you can't go into the kitchen, and so he puts 1 foot in the kitchen and you do nothing, and then suddenly he's got 2 feet in the kitchen, right? It's called pinpricks. You do little things and then they lead to another, and suddenly you've got a whole, right? problem.
Suddenly you've got the massacre of October 7th.
I think, and the Prime Minister, I think, addressed it yesterday in his remarks, yes, I think today, because of October 7th being a very real memory, and it's not just a memory, we've still got hostages in Gaza. Hopefully they'll get out soon. But I think because of what happened on October 7th in the south and what happened on October 8th in the north when Hezbollah suddenly opens up fire on us and so forth, I think, and here it's incumbent on us, that the agreement, the ceasefire deal, gives us the ability to act, to defend ourselves, to act against violations, to shoot. And now it's up to people like you and me and other people and other Israeli citizens to make sure the government utilizes this what they have here. And I think, the current Israeli leadership and who's been through October 7th isn't going to make the same mistake twice.
Okay, well, you make a good point about it's up to us to make sure that our government does not behave the way past governments have, that we've learned from our mistakes. So now, also, we have to read between the lines of what Netanyahu said in his speech. And the third thing he said was, he hinted that he said, he didn't say it exactly like this, but what he said was Biden withheld weapons and we don't have enough ammo. He didn't say it that way. But that was clear what he meant, because immediately the Biden administration gave interviews and said, no, that's not true, which, because they lie. Never mind about that for a second. But it was an important message. And the reason it was an important message is that Netanyahu was also trying to tell us, the public, without spelling it out, that these 60 days, it's not an accident that it's 60 days. That is when the Biden administration is out and the Trump administration is in. And I'd like to say that last night, I actually had a phone call with someone who is going to be a part of the new administration. And he said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm freaking out over this imminent ceasefire. And his response was very calmly, very charmingly to say, don't be freaked out. Just wait. We're coming. And that, I think, is how Netanyahu is viewing this as well. They're coming, and the picture will be different.
And if there are violations down the line, there'll be an administration, according to your logic, which will be more friendly to Israel, making it easier for Israel to do what we need to do. I also had a conversation yesterday. I met for coffee in Tel Aviv with, I won't say the name or the position, but let's say a senior diplomat from Europe. And this person was saying to me, Israel's actions against Hezbollah have created greater opportunities in Lebanon. Hezbollah is weakened. Does that mean we can strengthen the pro-Western forces in Lebanon? Can we finally have the Lebanese state move into this vacuum? Because as you know, Hezbollah up until now has been like a cancerous growth and has taken over the Lebanese state. Is this a chance to see Lebanon cease being a failed state? And he was making an argument, that maybe Israel has created an opportunity to build a better Lebanon. And I answered him, and I don't know if you agree with me or not. I said, overreach is a problem. And especially after you've had successes, it's very easy to overreach. But I said Israel's goals in Lebanon, as much as I'd like Lebanon to be a successful country, I'd like them to, be part of the Abraham Accords. I'd like Lebanon, to succeed and the people of Lebanon not to live in, have better lives and so forth. But I, as someone, I'm interested in Israeli interests and Israeli policy, and I'm saying this deal leaves Hezbollah alive north of the Litani, right? They can't rearm. They can't come to the south, but it leaves them alive. And he says, well, why not finish the job? And no. Overreach has a danger of things getting out of control. And I said, you guys are European, you can say what you want. And Europe has maybe different interests. I have one primary interest, which is the security of the state of Israel and its citizens. And I believe this deal in the current circumstances maximalizes that. And I don't see, it's always in the real world, I talked before about between what is possible and what is perfect. In the real world, you've got alternatives, real alternatives. I wish we could sign a peace treaty tomorrow with Lebanon. It's not a serious alternative. Unfortunately, it could be a few years from now, but today it's not. In the real world alternatives that are before the Israeli leadership, I think going for this deal was the right decision. And I'll say one more point. In his speech, Netanyahu's speech, which I urge people to read, he talked about Israel fighting a war on 7 fronts, yes? Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq, in Syria, Iran, and of course, Lebanon itself. In the past, Netanyahu was accused, and the government was accused of ignoring Lebanon. And maybe the criticism at the time looked very rational, but Netanyahu said we had to focus on Gaza at the beginning, and when the situation in Gaza made it possible, we could focus on Lebanon and so forth and so on. We're facing a 7-front war, and we have to know how to balance the different fronts and make sure that we're hitting the right place at the right time. And you said, right, that the ceasefire in Lebanon allows Israel maybe to focus on future challenges with Iran better. And at the same time, the ceasefire in Lebanon does much to isolate Hamas in Gaza. Because Hamas's whole policy, when they did the atrocious massacres of October 7th, yes, they thought that they would somehow bring about this, all their allies, all their fellow travelers, all the people who, are in the Hamas, what the Iranians call the axis of resistance, when we call it the axis of terror, that they'd have, there'd be an uprising on the West Bank and Israeli Arabs would be out there conducting pogroms against Israeli Jews, and that you'd have Hezbollah in Lebanon, full-scale war and so forth. That Hezbollah has taken out of the equation. This has isolated in Hamas, and I don't want to be, sound like a naive optimist. I don't think I am. But I think the taking Hezbollah out of the conflict, the fact that Hamas knows it's really by itself now, there's no, they are stuck there. The IDF will now continue aggressively the operation against Hamas in Gaza. I think that has the potential, not only for a hostage deal, I hope so. I can't promise. I don't know. But it has a potential to deliver a hostage deal and to deliver a political solution in Gaza in which Hamas's military machine, which has been destroyed, but it no longer has political control of Gaza and won't be able to rebuild any military machine.
Well, that sort of brings us to also the third point. Netanyahu did make that point about separating the two arenas. But, there really is an eight-front war here. And you said, there were things they expected, that they would have everybody join the resistance. The eighth front is global anti-Semitism. The eighth front are the campuses in America and in Europe. It's every single day we had a Chabad rabbi, a lovely 28-year-old Chabad rabbi, assassinated, murdered in cold blood in the United Arab Emirates. But every single day, they're in London, in Paris, in New York, in Los Angeles. The whole world is exploding anti-Semitism. And that is relevant to this war because those are the people who support the International Criminal Court's abominable behavior towards Israel. It enables those hateful anti-Semites to accuse Israel of being isolated. They isolate Israel and accuse Israel of being isolated. And so, yes, I have to say it's true that Netanyahu has had to balance all this stuff with the most hostile administration in Washington, and it's been even worse than the Obama administration because we're in the middle of an existential war, and Biden has withheld weapons and has said Palestinian statehood. He's still focused on getting the terrorists from Judea and Samaria into to rule Gaza. This is outrageous, but again, that's why he's going to be out on his ass in 2 months. He was voted out. It was not because of that, but that was definitely part of it. The woke, democratic, anti-Israel worldview, every single part of the Democratic Party's agenda was rejected. And that's good news. And that I can see why Netanyahu would like to wait. However, there is two things actually. One is, we really cannot rely on who's in the White House in order to protect us. Even if it's the most pro-Israel administration, which, by the way, the incoming one is. For every single appointee just loves Israel, and that's great. We cannot, for the future, we cannot rely on that the American electorate will go in our favor, number one. And number two, we've said that all along, but we also have to make sure that we don't eat ourselves up, which is one of the things we do whenever we try to defend ourselves. And I hate the word defend ourselves because that's everybody's right. When we need to preempt, and we have our own courts and our own attorney general, we've always had this, where we're tying our own hands. And that is one of the reasons that October 7th happened, because in the lead up, you said, these little things, little violations, the lead up to October 7th, we had courts that prevented us and an army, the general staff of the army, that told our soldiers don't shoot.
So
Okay, and so we got to tackle that too. By the way, that's another front. And
I think the whole discussion in Israel about reform internally. I mean that'll have to be discussed at the appropriate time. But I think you go over the top with your criticism of Biden and his administration. I've had criticisms, but I also have seen things that they've done well. Even just helping us get this deal, I'm willing to say a nice word about to them. They helped us get the first hostage deal when we have got over 100 people out. They put pressure on the Qataris. Maybe there should have been more, but we got more people out than was in the original proposal. And so I think it's not black or white. Like a lot of things in the real world, it's a mixture of the two. But I would like to say the thing, you talked about anti-Semitism. And you talked about Israel can't count always on having a good friend in the White House, though you believe the incoming administration will be a good friend. My thinking on anti-Semitism is clear, and without wanting to be too overly philosophical, look, after the Holocaust, many people thought that's it. Anti-Semitism has been exposed for, this is what anti-Semitism leads to. We have to fight it. Anti-Semitism is going to be thrown on the dust heap of history, and it'll be behind us, right? And that's clearly not true. Clearly not true. Anti-Semitism has over the centuries, yes, it's considered correctly maybe the oldest hatred humanity has, but it has the ability to metamorphosize. Is that a correct word? Did I say it correctly?
Metamorphosize, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Where it had to be relevant in a different place, in a different time, to different people. And so let's say today, you've still got the neo-Nazi type fascists who think all the Jews are terrible cosmopolitans and so forth, and they should all be killed. And you have people on the radical left who think all the Jews are Rothschild and capitalists and we're the exploiters of the working people. And then you've got Islamist anti-Semitism. And so you could be very fatalistic and you say, look at anti-Semitism, nothing changes. The world has never learned its lesson and that people will hate Jews and what can we do about it? And summarize it and say, some things don't change. But here's the most important thing, Ruthie. When you say some things don't change, might be true partially, but something very important has changed. And that is in 1948, the Jewish people reestablished their sovereignty in their homeland. They are now an independent country. Today, we're a lot stronger than we were in 1948, thank goodness. We can defend ourselves. We can make mistakes like we did on October 7th, a terrible, terrible national tragedy because of a mistake, where people killed, people massacred, terrible things that shouldn't have happened, yes? But we have the ability that was denied us all the years when there wasn't an independent Jewish state, when the Jewish people had to beg other people to protect them. There were the delegations who went to Churchill and Roosevelt saying, do something, bomb the camps and so forth, and nothing was done. And so we should never forget that. The modern state of Israel is the answer to that. The Jewish people can protect themselves and defend themselves. And whether it's in implementing this deal, policing this deal, making sure that if Hezbollah in the north breaks these the agreement, we will act to defend ourselves. That's the fundamental change in Jewish life. And that's the answer to anti-Semitism. The Jewish people taking their destiny into their own hands and protecting themselves just as every other people can do.
Well, that's true. And thank God we have a state, and you're absolutely right. But we cannot ignore the fact that this business of globalizing the Intifada has been extremely successful. Now, again, yes, it's also causing countries to move to the right because of
a reaction to
the illegal and legal immigration of radical Islamists into Western countries, and they don't want to integrate and they don't want to be part of Western culture. They want to impose they want to bring every other culture into the dark ages. The trouble is that it's been a very successful campaign all over the place. You mentioned, neo-Nazis, hatred and everything. That is so tiny compared to the marriage of the woke left with the Islamists.
So in America, that's true. But in places like in some parts of Europe, you've got these movements that are very troubling, yes?
But they're not huge movements. No, the woke movements are worse. And Ironically, though, I know a lot of Israelis and a lot of Americans love to hate the Hungarian leader, Viktor Orban. He away.
I didn't put him in that category. I don't.
No.
Yeah.
But leftist Israelis accuse Netanyahu of being friends with Orban, the fascist. This is a common. They spew nonsense. But Orban said, I'm going to ignore that ruling of the ICC. For example, Eastern Europe says nothing doing with this business. This is Western Europe and America. Now, again, the Trump administration has vowed to put a stop to this kind of business and not allow this stuff on campuses and all that. But the fact that we saw it bubbling to the surface, the fact that we saw that, that was good. We need to expose it. The only question is what we will do. When I say we, there's Jewish people, but of course I mean Israel and the Israeli government and the army. It always comes down to that. A deal is as good as your ability or will to enforce it. And I am skeptical about our will to enforce it precisely, not because we don't do it and not because we don't have weapons, because when it comes to the gray areas, we are our, humanitarian side, it's actually good. It's what's good about us as well. But it comes to the fore and it's not helpful in wartime, with this. And that is one of the reasons that we insisted, we keep sending humanitarian aid into Gaza, though that's harming the hostages because it gets only into the hands of Hamas. The thing is that we spend so much time trying to pity poor civilians, and some deserve our pity, but we've got to protect ourselves. It's not just defend ourselves. We have got to take charge, and the hostages should have been home by now. And I don't mean that's Netanyahu's fault. I blame Biden for that. And you said he pressured Qatar. No, he didn't. He could have. A lot more. Yeah. But anyway, the fact is, we've got to get them out of there.
So we've come to the end of our time. I just want to add on one note.
Okay.
When a politician panders to their base, that's, standard operating procedure for a successful politician. If you're a Republican politician in the United States, you know what your base likes, you know what to say. And if you're a Democratic politician in the United States, you know what to say to get your base, and to get applause from your base. What Netanyahu has done now in agreeing to this, the polling that we saw last night on the different networks in Israel says most of Netanyahu's voters are not so happy about this deal. And I think that says something about the man, that he sincerely believes that this deal is in the interest of Israel. This deal is in Israel's national security. He could be wrong. Maybe your criticism is right. I think he's correct. And the fact that he's willing to take a decision, despite the fact that most of the people who voted for him don't agree with it, I think that says something. That's the difference between a regular politician and someone who's a cut above.
Who's a leader. Well, I would like to end on that note to say, I would word it differently and to say, if Netanyahu is doing this, even at the expense of the popularity of his base, etc., then I trust that he actually has some very important plan that he can't tell us about and that he's working on it. And that's what I trust in, not that he's a leader who had to go against his base, but that there's something cooking that we don't know about yet.
And I look forward to discussing this again next week when we meet once again.
Yeah, it was great as always. And again, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.